in the week when he claimed, without evidence, that the 75-year-old protester who was shoved by police in Buffalo, New York, may have been part of a, quote, setup. She suggested the president was doing the right thing, asking questions, and that it was not a baseless conspiracy. Listen for yourself.
When we see a brief snippet of a video, it's incumbent upon reporters and those who are surveying the situation to ask questions rather
upon the president to have facts before he tweets anything out. He's the president of the United States.
The president did have facts before he tweeted it out that undergirded his questions.
Baseless conspiracy theory.
It's not a baseless conspiracy. No, not at all. I won't acknowledge that because look, let's contrast this to the George Floyd situation, which that horrific video that we all saw. Every single police officer that I saw across the country came out and said, this is an inexcusable action, and I condemn this police officer. In this case, there were 57 police officers who said, I resign in protest over the way these two officers were handled. And the president says, those law enforcement officers have a right to be heard.
But does the president think that anything justifies that 75-year-old man being pushed down to the ground like we all saw?
The president does not condone violence. He wants to see the appropriate amount of police force used in any given situation, including this one, but he believes that the officers have a right to be heard.
CNN's political correspondent, Abby Phillip, is with me from Washington. And Abby, this was pretty inflammatory. What is going on here?
The president's motto is "Don't back down." Don't apologize, don't give an inch. And I think you're seeing Kayleigh McEnany really following through on that in a way that is literally unbelievable because it really has very little bearing to the truth. I mean, Brooke, if you look at what the president actually tweeted, he wasn't asking a question. He said the Buffalo protester could be an Antifa provocateur, and then he's part of the job in this White House.
has set up 1,000 internment camps across the country. I had no trouble believing his statement, because there is ample documentation to support his statement. Example, Rex 84, Operation Garden Plot, and now the NDAA. However, when Gunderson reported that the federal government was storing over 500,000 caskets outside of Atlanta, I also knew he was accurate on this point, because Sherry Wilcox found the evidence in this photo. However, when I heard that Gunderson was accusing the government of storing 30,000 guillotines, I thought he had lost his mind. Why would the government want to store guillotines? Gunderson told various patriot groups that the guillotines were being stored for the day that the government declares martial law and moves in to round up and execute American dissenters. Gunderson prophetically told patriot groups that the federal government was going to keep track of all of us. The last statement has indeed proven accurate given the recent Snowden/NSA scandal. Can somebody please explain to me why the government would need to order 30,000 guillotines? For what legitimate purpose could these tools of execution be utilized? The guillotine was invented by a Frenchman named Dr. Guillotine. The guillotine reached the height of its popularity when it was mainly used in the French Revolution to eliminate any potential opposition from people with dangerous ideas. Given these facts, then why in God's good name would this government import 30,000 guillotines as Gunderson claimed? Oh, I know that some of the sheep are now looking up from the ground and have just said there aren't any guillotines in the United States. Then please tell me, sheep of America, why did Representative Doug Tepper of the Georgia Legislative Assembly introduce a bill which will supplement the method of execution, the electric chair with the guillotine? Have you ever heard the allegations which accuse some doctors, primarily in China, of killing patients in order to sell their organs on the black market? After you read the following paragraphs, you may conclude that those rumors are true. When Representative Tepper was asked about his motivation to exclusively use the guillotine to execute death row inmates, he said, it would allow for death row inmates as organ donors. The very spooky Tepper for the reason that the blade makes a clean cut and leaves vital organs intact. I will be happy to let this statement speak for itself. Below is a draft of the legislation. HB 1274. Death penalty, guillotine provisions. Section 1. The General Assembly finds that while prisoners condemned to death may wish to donate one or more of their organs for transplant, any such desire is thwarted by the fact that electrocution makes all such organs unsuitable for transplant. The intent of the General Assembly in enacting this legislation is to provide for a method of execution which is compatible with the donation of organs by a condemned prisoner. Section 2. Article 2 of Chapter 10 of Title 17 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated, relating to the death penalty generally, is amended by striking in its entirety Code Section 17-10-38, relating to death sentences generally, and inserting in lieu thereof the following. 17-10-38. A. All persons who have been convicted of a capital offense and have had imposed upon them a sentence of death shall, at the election of the condemned, suffer such punishment, either by electrocution or by guillotine. If the condemned fails to make an election by the 30th day preceding the date scheduled for execution, punishment shall be by electrocution. B. In all cases in which the defendant is sentenced to be electrocuted executed, it shall be the duty of the trial judge, in passing sentence, to direct that the defendant be delivered to the Department of Corrections for electrocution execution, at a state correctional institution designated by the department. Section 3. Said article is further amended by striking in its entirety Code Section 17-10-44. Relating to death chamber apparatus and related matters, and inserting in lieu thereof the following. 17-10-44. The Department of Corrections shall provide a death chamber, and all necessary apparatus, machinery, and appliances for inflicting the penalty of death by electrocution, or by guillotine. Where would the proposed Georgia legislature guillotines have come from? Unless Gunderson was correct in that 15,000 are being stored in Montana and 15,000 are being stored in Georgia. Has anyone bothered to do the math? A single guillotine reportedly can chop off the heads of about 100 people per hour. In 1 hour, the federal government has the capacity to execute as many as 3 million people. In one 10-hour day, 30 million people could be executed by way of a guillotine. We already know that the Department of Homeland Security has purchased 2.2 billion rounds of ammunition to go with their purchase of 2,700 armored personnel carriers. Do you realize that this is enough ammo to fight a war for about 7 years, and that there are enough DHS personnel carriers to allocate over 50 per state? Can you imagine if they were concentrated in their distribution patterns? This would be the equivalent of an invading army as DHS goes from house to house and seizes dissidents by the millions, and America will soon have their own version of the French Revolution. Since this story broke, one had to ask the question, why guillotines? Some sources stated that the next phase of the transhumanism experiments and developments requires a severed human head to facilitate the mixing of humans and animals into one sentient being. Further, futuristic DARPA robots will have human heads after the initial purge and subsequent executions. This makes sense because after the head is severed, the eyes blink and signs of life continue for up to a minute. This would allow a team to freeze and to preserve the head for whatever purpose. And just as frightening, I was told that some of satanic rituals require severed human heads, and we know the global elite, in large part, are indeed Satanists. I can understand people being skeptical about the guillotines because my first reaction was to reject the notion, under my personal veil of cognitive dissonance. Yet, the emerging facts speak for themselves. Although we did not know Gunderson personally, we did know Bill Pawelek, and we was well acquainted with Griffith. And even if Pawelek and Griffith were jointly mistaken on this issue, how would one explain away Deppard's efforts to introduce the guillotine into the Georgia justice system? The endgame implications are frightening. When we add the topic of guillotines to what we already know about 2.2 billion rounds of DHS ammo and 2,700 armored DHS personnel carriers, why should this be so hard to believe? Hell can't take the fact that DHS has armed to the teeth against Americans and are planning to murder Americans in horrific ways. Be prepared to be shocked as you watch the following chilling report on the possession and intent of the military with regard to the use of guillotines. The $64 million question is, who is the government planning to use these guillotines on? We are anonymous. We are legion. We do not forgive. We do not forget. Expect us.
vaccine. We need to make vaccines, treatment, and diagnostics accessible to everyone.
Vaccines, treatments, and diagnosis will be the most effective way to do it.
We need new diagnostics, vaccines, treatments, and an equal distribution to all.
On equitable access to diagnostics, treatments, and vaccines.
And affordability of the vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics.
In order to develop the living treatments and vaccines.
Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities, the El Paso, Las Cruces communities, Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.